Hello fellow astrologers, and welcome back to our brand new astrology keyring series, the C+D Basic Birth Chart series. This video is the fourth video in our Taylor Swift birth chart breakdown, where we go over her generational planets. In our last video, CD1TP, we went over her traditional planets, talking in greater detail about her Mercury, her Venus, her Mars, her Jupiter, and her Saturn, which are the traditional planets that you can see with the naked eye that aren't the luminaries, which are the Sun, the Moon, and the Ascendant. In this video, we're going to go over her Uranus, her Neptune, and her Pluto. Now, the generational planets don't affect you as much as your traditional planets or your luminaries, but they do have an effect on your generation and things that are happening during those times. There's a 6-year time period where people have all three of these planets in these signs at the same time. So they affect you more generationally than they do more personally, unless you're talking about the houses or other aspects they make to planets. And those are things we'll get into the more intermediate and advanced videos, more so than we will in the basic birth chart. But it's good to touch on all of them so you know what they are and how they're affecting you generationally, because a number of you will have these planets that are affecting you generationally. We'll go over our basic breakdown, then we'll go to Google for each one and read what Google has to say, and afterwards we'll go each one to see what individual webpage have to say about people who had these generational planets. Let's start out by reading about Uranus in Capricorn. This generation seeks reform through structure and pragmatism. Innovation comes in the form of modernizing old systems and redefining institutions. Capricorn Uranus blends rebellion with realism, creating change that is both radical and sustainable, often in business and in government realms. Okay, so Uranus was in Capricorn from December 1988 all the way through April 1995. It did take a brief retrograde back in Sagittarius in mid-1988, but it firmly stayed in Capricorn all the way through late 1995. Between the years of 1988 and 1995, we saw a lot of changes. Uranus itself is a planet of revolution, of technology, and Capricorn is a sign of business and economy, and also of authority and power. And in those years, we saw the fall of the Berlin Wall and the ending of the Soviet Union and the transformation of capitalism in Eastern Europe, which are both revolutionary as Uranus and practical as Capricorn. We also saw the birth of the digital corporate world, with the World Wide Web being created, and it's going public during that time, with the huge rise in tech giants like Microsoft and Apple, and even Amazon was founded. Automation and globalization was surging at this time. There was a huge stock market boom in the 90s, and NAFTA was signed for globalizing, system integration, and transitional capitalism, while at the same time corporate downsizing and decentralization breaking rigid hierarchies and increasing technological efficiency. We saw the beginning of the end of apartheid, the reunification of Germany, and major political transitions worldwide. And we also saw the rise of personal computers in the office, mobile phones, and internet protocols and email. It was a big time in reforming technology and industry worldwide. All in all, Uranus symbolized a lot of revolutions within systems, digitization of structures and governments, banks and corporations that all adopted technology, the collapse of old hierarchies followed by the creation of new high-tech ones, and a collective push towards accountability, efficiency, and structural innovation. And it symbolizes the birth of a generation that was truly tech savvy, as opposed to some before that were only partially, but this generation really learned a lot and embodied a lot of how tech has changed the face of our planet. If you look here, you'll see Uranus in Capricorn, and you see she has a lot of other planets. We were talking about that earlier. So does Neptune, and we'll talk about Neptune next, about how it affected things in Capricorn. But in this case, Uranus is about tech and also revolution. And in this case, it's also Capricorn. So Capricorn's about establishing structure. And when you put the two together, it talks about bringing about new innovation. In Taylor's situation, she began in the most traditional branch of the industry of Nashville's country music. And with the standard Uranus rebellious nature, she hacked the system using her own songwriting styles, social media savvy, and direct contact with their actual fan base to bypass a lot of the label gatekeepers by promoting herself. And even when her masters got sold, she reclaimed them and re-recorded a new catalog to reclaim ownership. Talk about a savvy business mind when it comes to the industry. So let's go over here and look at what Google has to say about Uranus and Neptune. Uranus in Capricorn between 1988 and 1995 signifies a generational influence where revolutionary and unconventional approaches to establish structure, traditions, and authorities are expressed. This placement is associated with the generation that created new technological infrastructures and organizational methods, challenging traditional economic and governmental models. People born under this placement are often innovators who seek to reform the system they were born into, sometimes through disruptive but necessary changes, and are the forefront of integrating technology into all of these facets of life. And that sums it kind of up into a T right there, where it talks about how people from this generation have really made that big transition from the old analog ways into some of the new digital ways. And she was a pioneer and an innovator during part of that, especially for reforming some of the music industry and how people interact and transited through the entertainment industry. I see they go down to talk about it a little bit more, and you got the deeper dive. But let's go ahead and move on and see what one of the other web pages have to say about Uranus and Capricorn. Let's try the Keen Psychic and see what they have to say. Scroll down here. Uranus and Capricorn key facts. Uranus in the Earth sign of Capricorn is organized, forward-looking, and innovative. Because Capricorn individuals tend to be very business-minded and excellent planners, it is quite paradoxical to have this zodiac sign in Uranus. Which is funny, true, because Uranus is actually a destabilizing and rebellious type of planet, but Capricorn is very structured and methodical. So it's a bit contradictory. Anyways, let's continue reading. It should never be forced, quarrelsome, or shrouded in violence. Uranus in Capricorn exercises caution and responsibility in their plans to avoid change and shock. They do not strike until they feel their plans are incredibly safe. These qualities see them easily elevate themselves in society because they are perceived as someone stable, calm, and reliable. In business matters, they can implement new strategies and can change their approach at the flick of a finger. And they thrive in markets that allow them to be innovative. So yes, this talks about a lot about that, about how the big change and people with that personality were adapting to the change as well. Very hardworking and determined and ambitious in life with solid plans. They take a step back to look at problems, to analyze them, and they're not hasty or reactionary. Others see them as ambitious risk takers. Talks about some of their struggles could be that they're tenacious and determined, but at times they can be stubborn and sometimes sore losers. But if the plan doesn't work out the way they want, they are persistent and they keep going, moving ahead. Cool. Goes on to tell a little bit more. I'm not going to read it all, just want to touch on it. But that was a cool touch on what the Uranus in Capricorn is. Let's go back here. Now, She has all these planets in Capricorn, so these all come together to tell a bigger story about what's going on with her. And it does show that it keeps how Capricorn has helped her push herself in her career using innovative technology, and different means than your standard traditional methods. And it's something that she did a lot with to really come up in life. Now let's move on to Neptune in Capricorn, which is right over here, just 7 degrees later, here at 11 degrees. So Neptune was in Capricorn between 1984 and 1998. Neptune rules illusion, inspiration, idealism, media, and collective imagination. And Capricorn rules institutions, governments, and business authorities. So when Neptune moves through Capricorn, the fog of idealism seeps into the power structures, a time where the dreams become the system. Neptune in Capricorn also had a major hand in the fall of Berlin and the collapse of the Soviet Union, when you had the communism idealistic dream dissolved by Neptune, leaving the practical capitalism of Capricorn standing. The fantasy of utopian government gave way to pragmatic globalism, a hallmark of Neptune in Capricorn energy. The corporate culture of the late 80s and the 90s, big brands, ad-driven identities, and glamorized success. Marketing became myth-making. Think like Nike and Apple and Coca-Cola and MTV. Just a blur between art and business. Neptune's illusion mixed with Capricorn's enterprise. MTV, 24-hour news, celebrity culture, and Hollywood franchises reshaping collective dreams. And the internet became the global network that would become the shared field of dreams for humanity. New Age spirituality entered the corporate world, manifesting your success, positive thinking, abundance mindset. Yoga, meditation, holistic health all started moving into the mainstream workplace. Spirituality became industrialized. And people born with Capricorn and Neptune were the type that were driven to manifest their dream into reality and making the dreams profitable. And Taylor Swift is definitely a dream come true story. Manifesting a career very early in life, her dream job became real. That's Neptune's illusion and storytelling made Capricorn by turning it into a carefully managed brand and timeline. A self-contained fantasy world, but all under the same professional architecture. Taylor Swift turned vulnerability, heartbreak, longing, and nostalgia into a marketing strength. Instead of being destroyed by tabloid projections like the shadow of Neptune, she learned how to monetize her emotion ethically and artistically. Her fight over artist rights aren't just a business move, they stem from an idealistic vision of fairness in the industry. She turned a personal wound into a moral cause. Neptune's compassion inside Capricorn's pragmatism. But let's go back real quick and take a look at what Google has to say about Capricorn Neptune. Neptune in Capricorn indicates a generation that blends idealism with a desire to transform and establish structures of authority, fame, and finance. This placement brings an imaginative, spiritual, and compassionate approach to themes of ambition and can result in a focus on creating sustainable business model, institutional spirituality, and systematic consciousness. So yes, this reiterates the whole idea that Neptune in Capricorn personifies bringing the dream to life, manifesting it into reality. And Taylor Swift definitely has a life where the dream came true. You can see here where Google kind of gets more in depth about all of that. But now let's move on to see what one of the other web pages have to say about Neptune in Capricorn. Okay, let's scroll down and see what we got here. Or Tarot Lady. Let's look at Neptune in Capricorn, the horoscope. If you were born with Neptune in Capricorn in your chart, you are especially interested and the methods of getting rich and achieving success. You want to be in control of all situations, to never again have to ask for permission, to have everything you ever wished for. Fame, fortune, good looks, and luxury style, and a beautiful woman or man in your arm are plenty of things that are tied to success, and you want them all. Goes on to say that it's a long and hard path, and that you can come up with new and innovative ideas on ways to succeed. Let's scroll down. Okay, it touches on some of the traits and a few people that have that. Scroll down a little bit more. Talk about people having spiritual goals and a firm and resolute personality, and they're pretty steady on trying to keep making the dream come to life. Talks about being able to tackle problems efficiently, a general desire to wish for a level of freedom that bridges the generational gap. And it goes on to tell quite a bit more. We're not going to go too far into all this. It does have some negatives and positives. It might be worth a little bit of a deeper dive later on, but let's not linger too much. But again, it shows a combination in her chart where the Capricorn put together with abrupt change and keeping the dream alive help drive goals so that people with these planets can actually move forward a lot by holding on to their dreams and believing in being able to manifest them into reality. But now let's move on to Pluto in Scorpio. Now Scorpio rules Pluto. This is one of the few times, the only time in modern history where we've been able to see Pluto and actually see it in its actual ruler. So let's read what it has to say about Pluto in Scorpio. Pluto in Scorpio signifies a generation of deep transformation, confronting taboos, power, and rebirth. Emotional extremes lead to regeneration and personal empowerment. There's an urge to overcome hidden motives and heal through facing darkness head on. Pluto in Scorpio happened between 1983 and 1995 and marked one of the most intense taboo-breaking and truth-seeking periods of the late 20th century. During the mid-80s through the 90s, the AIDS epidemic dominated global awareness, forcing society to confront sex, fear, stigmas, and morality, the very heart of what Scorpio is. Medical research, hospice care, and activism transformed public health and compassion through exposure of the taboos. We had Iran-Contra affairs, savings and loan scandals, and later we even had whitewater investigations into hidden power deals being dragged out into the light. And Wall Street greed created the term yuppie, which no one ever uses anymore, which is funny, where excess culminated market crashes and the collective examination of corruption and the shadow economics. And a birth of whistleblower archetypes from investigative journalism to insider leaks. The Cold War ended, a symbolic death and rebirth of the world order. Collapse of the Soviet Union, apartheid, totalitarianism, Pluto's destruction to renew the cycle of on a planetary scale. Talk shows and confessional media like Oprah and Maury, a surge in erotic thrillers and dark cinema like Fatal Attraction, Basic Instinct, Silence of the Lambs, exploring desire, danger, and death. Music turns intimate and raw with alternative grunge, hip-hop, and the rise of dark pop. The rise of the cyberpunk movement, technology as a mirror of human darkness and control. Underground hacker culture begins, probing hidden systems, uncovering secrets. Quintessential Pluto in Scorpio symbolism. Feminist and LGBTQ activism confront power and sexuality head on. Society's relationship with abuse, addiction, and trauma becomes visible, leading to long-term healing frameworks. Exploration of the occult, magic, vampires, and death imagery was mainstream in culture. The rise of the goths, grunge angst, and Madonna's sexual reinvention. You may ask, well, how does Taylor Swift personify any of this stuff? Well, she had a Phoenix Rising career. She went from a country singing youngster to a pop megastar to an outcast to an indie poet, and finally a global legend. She dealt with betrayal, destruction of public image, and then a total resurrection of her career. She didn't just survive crisis, she used them as creative fuel. Pain becomes power, loss becomes gold. The fight over her master recordings, a struggle over who controls the soul of her art, she responded by re-recording an entire discography, reclaiming power from those who exploited her. The Pluto power struggle, put together with Scorpio's taking it back through persistence and transformation. Her openness about heartbreak, betrayal, envy, revenge, and forgiveness brings the Scorpio shadow into life. In her early career, she was shamed for dating publicly, then turned into empowerment through her songs, framing feminine sensuality as strength rather than scandal, facing traditional taboos head on. Taylor Swift repeatedly turns private wounds, industrial betrayal, media bullying into transparent storytelling. So yes, she embodies a lot of what Pluto in Scorpio comes to manifest. But now let's take it back and look at what Google has to say. Pluto in Scorpio signifies a generation that experiences a profound focus on themes of power, transformation, and taboo subjects like death and sex. This placement is often seen as Pluto being at home in its own sign, creating intense emotions, a drive for deep psychological understanding, and the potential for both destructive and regenerative forces within individuals and society. So yes, Scorpio is very much at home in Pluto because it is all about death and rebirth, sex and other taboos, things that people are weird to talk about in public, but some things that actually are true that people have to admit. Death, life doesn't exist without death or sex. And it's something that people are weird to talk about, but it's not something that Scorpio or Pluto's afraid to talk about or bring to the forefront. Going to the deepest depths of things that people are sometimes uncomfortable about. And this whole generation is about bringing those things out. And you also see that in a lot of Taylor Swift's music. It faces a lot of those things about sexuality and life and relationships and women empowerment that was once considered all taboo. We got a little bit of deeper dive here that Google has, and you can also look at AI mode. But now let's go over here and see what one of these web pages have to say about Scorpio in Pluto. Pluto in Scorpio. Okay, let's scroll down here, see what we have. Reddit, UK, Astrology, Medium, Coral. You know what? Let's go back here and look at Girl and Her Moon. Pluto in Scorpio, Astrology in Birth Chart. There's something unmistakably powerful about those born with Pluto in Scorpio. It is in their eyes, their energy, their persistence. They've walked through metaphorical fires and sometimes literal ones just to be here. And in doing so, they've become soul forgers, truth holders, and quiet revolutionaries of the heart. That sounds very mysterious. Goes on to talk about it is the planet of death and transformation, regeneration. Tells you what time they were, what years they were born. It truly is an age of unveiling secrets. And we're starting to see more and more in our culture where things are starting to come out and secrets can no longer hide. Scroll down a little bit more. It goes on to talk about going through a lot of trauma between depression, identity depth, addiction, abuse, deep loss, emotional fragmentation. But in true Scorpio Pluto form, they didn't stay there. They came out. They transmuted it. And it is a lot about exposing that what is hidden. Now, I'm not going to go too much. It does talk about it in your birth chart and going through more through the houses. That gets more involved in our intermediate section. We talk about it in the houses, and we'll get into that later. But I don't want to spend too much time here. It was a pretty good touch on it. So as you can see, we kind of sum up how a lot of these things personify things that happened to her. Even though it's a more cultural thing, it wasn't just her. She was a little piece of it. She was able to interact with all these different things and show how she was a piece of making some of these things happen, as she was a public figure personifying a number of these things. With the Uranus and Capricorn, the breaking down of old ways and restructuring, and the Neptune of manifesting dreams, and finally Pluto with the exposing of taboos and the death and rebirth. All of these things personify a lot of stuff that Miss Swift had to go through. Again, these are wide angle views of things that happen to people. There's a whole 6-year period of time where people have this in their birth chart, where people have these 3 planets in these signs in their birth chart. So these kind of reoccurring themes will show up for a lot of people, not just Taylor Swift. But we were trying to talk a little bit about how they affected her personally, even though these are very macrocosmic from a big step back. But I think this did a relatively good job of covering how these things worked individually as well as combined. And that sums up our look at Taylor Swift's outer planets, the generational planets. In the next video, CD1POI, we'll be talking about her points of interest. We'll talk about the North Node, the part of fortune, Chiron, and the midheaven. So stay tuned for the next video. We hope you have enjoyed this video from our Astrology Keyring series. If you like the content, please like, follow, and share with your friends. Thank you for watching and have a blessed journey.